Hello everyone and welcome to another Peaky Boardgamers episode. My name is Rakos and today I will teach you the game Puerto Rico. This version here was ranked first in Board Games Geek ranking a few years ago and had remained there for quite a long time. This is because Puerto Rico is a great family game for 3 to 5 players that plays in about 2 hours. Let's move to the table and see how the game is played. In the game, players will be operating in the new world of Puerto Rico, constructing buildings, cultivating fields, and exporting goods. Players will be alternating turns, selecting different role tiles from the central play area. All players will be performing the selected action, but only the player who chooses the role will take the action with an additional privilege. With a builder action, you construct a new building. With a settler action, you gain a new plantation. With a mayor action, you increase your workforce to work in your buildings and your plantations. With a craftsman action, you produce goods from your plantations. With a trader action, you sell your goods for money. And with a captain action, you export your goods for victory points. At the end of the game, the player with the most victory points will achieve the greatest prosperity and highest respect in Puerto Rico. At first, place the central board in the middle of the table and place all building tiles to their corresponding spaces on the board. Place all doubloon coins in the bank area. Next, place all roll tiles next to the board. Prospector tiles are used depending on your player count. In a 5 players game, you use both prospector tiles. In a 4 players game, only one, and in a 3 players game, you do not use any prospector tile. In our example of a 4 players game, I will use only one. Create a supply of colonist markers next to the board. The number of markers depends on your player count. 55 in a 3 players game, 75 in a 4 players game, and 95 colonists in a 5 players game. Place the colonist ship token next to this supply and then a number of markers equal to the number of players on the tile. Place the trading house next to the board and also create supplies of the 5 different types of goods. Place the appropriate 3 cargo ship tokens next to the board. Which tokens you will use depends again on your player count. In a 3 players game, you will use the tokens that depict 4, 5 and 6 cargo spaces. In a 4 players game, the tiles with 5, 6 and 7 spaces. And in a 5 players game, the tiles depicting 6, 7 and 8 cargo spaces. In our 4 players example, these tiles will be used. Create a supply of victory point tokens depending on your player count. 75 in a 3 players game, 100 points with 4 players and 122 points if there are 5 players in the game. Each player takes a personal board and 3 doubloons from the supply. Then, you choose a player at random to be the starting player who takes the governor tile. The rest of the player turn order is determined clockwise. This first player also starts the game with a blue indigo plantation, which is placed in any one of the island spaces. According to this player turn order and depending on the player count, all other players will get a starting plantation as I show you in the graphics. So in our 4 players example, the second player will also start with an indigo, and the 3rd and 4th players will start with a corn tile. Shuffle the remaining plantation tiles and create 5 equal stacks. Then reveal plantation tiles equal to the number of players plus 1. So in our 4 players example, we will reveal 5 random tiles. Create a supply with all 8 quarry tiles next to the board as well, and the game is now ready to start. A short pause in the video here to remind you that if you haven't done already, please subscribe to this channel. It costs nothing but really makes a difference to me and this channel. Also hit that bell button so you get notified of all our future videos. The game is played in rounds and in every round all players will take one turn starting with a governor and then continuing clockwise. On their turn, players select one of the available roll tiles, triggering a specific phase for all players. The player who selected the roll, however, will operate in this phase with an additional privilege. After all players have taken a turn being the active player and selecting one of the rolls, the round ends and then you place one doubloon to all unselected rolls next to the board. All players return their rolls back to the middle of the table. The governor tile is passed to the next clockwise player, and you begin the next round with that player selecting a roll first. Of course, if you select a roll with doubloons, you also receive the doubloons to your personal supply. This process continues until the end of the game, which is when either the supply of colonists depletes, or the supply of victory points depletes, or when one of the players has filled all 12 building spaces on their personal board. We will explain more about the end of the game later on. For now, let's start by explaining the different roles, their corresponding actions and privileges. I will start by explaining the mayor phase. In the mayor phase, all players will share all colonist tokens from the ship, taking one token at a time in a clockwise manner, starting with the mayor until all of the tokens are taken. The number of tokens on the ship is not specific. So, if we had 5 tokens on the ship, the mayor will take the first, followed by the next player who takes one as well, and the next player, and since there is still one more token, the mayor will take a second one. The privilege of this action is that the mayor takes an additional colonist from the general supply. All players then place their new colonists in San Juan, where it's possible that players have additional tokens from previous rounds. At this point, all colonists in San Juan must be placed in empty colonist spaces in your plantations, your quarries, or your buildings. If there are enough spaces, all colonists will be placed. If, however, you have more colonists than empty spaces, the excess colonists will remain in San Juan. Colonists are very important because any plantation, quarry, or building without one cannot be operated and be of any use. As a last step, after all players have placed their colonists, you count all empty spaces in all players' board and you place new colonists from the supply onto the colonist ship equal to this count. Next, there is a builder phase. In this phase, all players starting with the builder and moving clockwise may construct one of the buildings by paying the cost of it, which is depicted here in the circle. So, to build an office, it would cost 5 doubloons. After you pay the cost, you place the building on an empty building space on your board. Players are limited by their building spaces on their board. Players have 12 building slots, but large buildings take 2 slots. The privilege of the builder player is that they can build with a discount of 1 doubloon. So the builder can build the office with 4 doubloons. Also, all players, as well as the builder, can have an additional discount of 1 doubloon for each active quarry they have on their board. However, the number of quarries you can use when you build is limited by the number of icons depicted in the buildings column. So, if the builder decided to build the office and had 3 active quarries, they could use only 2 of them, plus 1 from the privilege, 3 doubloon total discount, and build the office for just 2 doubloons. Purple buildings offer ongoing abilities or end-of-game scoring abilities that come in effect only after you have activated them with a colonist. When the effect of a building applies is written within brackets on the building, so the university, for example, has a power that applies in the builder phase. For example, if a player has the university active on their player board, then each time they construct a new building, then they immediately take a new colonist from the supply and place it in the new building, thus activating it. I will explain all abilities of buildings when I explain the phase in which they apply. Production buildings do not offer any special ability, but are important when you craft goods in the craftsman phase. In the settler phase, all players in a clockwise manner may take 1 plantation. The privilege of the player who selected the settler is that they can get a quarry instead of a plantation. So, the settler goes first and takes either a plantation or a quarry, and then continuing clockwise, all players may take one tile or not take one at all. Players place their new tile on an empty island space on their board. When all players are done, any remaining tiles are then discarded in a face-up discard pile, and then players flip new tiles from the stacks, always one tile more than players in the game. Let's now see some buildings that have abilities that apply in the settler phase. With a hacienda, you gain an additional plantation whenever it's your turn to perform the settler action. So, if you are the settler, you could take 2 plantations or 1 quarry and 1 plantation. If you are not the settler, then you can only take 2 plantations. If you have an active construction hat, then you can always take a quarry instead of a plantation, even if you have not selected the settler. The hospice is similar to the university. Whenever you gain a new plantation, you immediately gain a new colonist from the supply and place it on the new plantation. We're moving now to the craftsman phase. In this phase, all players will produce goods, starting with the craftsman and then continuing clockwise. You produce goods by combining discs on your plantations with discs on corresponding production buildings. The only exception is corn, which does not require a production building. So, with 1 colonist on a corn plantation, I produce 1 corn. Now, I have 2 indigo colonists, but only 1 colonist working on an indigo plant. So, I gain only 1 indigo. On the other hand, I have 2 colonists working on a sugar mill, but only 1 colonist working in a plantation, so again I only gain 1 sugar. Now, all other players will also produce in order. Important, if the goods you're supposed to produce are not available in the supply, then unfortunately you cannot produce them. This is why the privilege of the craftsman is only applied after all players have first produced. The privilege is that the craftsman will craft an additional good of the ones the player is able to produce. So I could take either an indigo or sugar or a corn. Finally, the ability of the factory applies in this phase. If you have an active factory, you might gain an additional doubloon income depending on the number of different type of goods you produce. If you produce 2, 3, 4 or 5 different goods, then you gain 1, 2, 3 or 5 doubloons respectively. So in this example that I have produced 3 different types of goods, I will also gain 2 doubloons from my factory. Let's move now to the trader phase. In this phase, all players starting with a trader and continuing clockwise may sell one of their goods from their personal supply to the trading house in order to gain doubloons. The amount of doubloons depends on the type of good you are selling according to this diagram. The privilege for the trader is that they will gain 1 more doubloon than the indicated amount. As we said, after the trader, all other players may sell one of their goods. However, there are a couple of rules here. The first one is that you cannot sell a good of a kind which is already in the trading house. This rule, however, may be broken if you have an active office, in which case you can sell a good that already exists. The second rule is that the process ends immediately after the trading house is full of goods. This means that you might not be able to sell at all. At the end of the phase, players will empty the trading house, but only if it were full. If it's not full, goods remain on the trading house. Finally, the small and large market buildings have an ability which is applicable to the trader phase. With a small market, whenever you sell, you gain +1 doubloon. And with a large market, you gain +2 doubloons. So, in this scenario that I'm also the trader, if I sold the sugar good, I would gain 2 + 2 + 1 plus another doubloon for being the trader, 6 doubloons. In the captain phase, all players must deliver their goods to the cargo ships. The first player to deliver goods will be the captain, and the process will continue clockwise until all players have delivered as much as they can. Rules are here that each ship can only load goods of one type, Ships must load different type of goods from other ships, and you cannot deliver goods to a ship if its cargo spaces are full. On your turn, you select one type of your goods and load as many barrels as you can into the ship. Then you will gain 1 victory point for each barrel delivered. The privilege for the captain is that they will gain +1 victory point for the first delivery only. In our example, the captain may only deliver this one corn good and will gain 1 victory point +1 for the privilege, 2 victory points. The second player can only deliver this one corn as well and will gain 1 victory point. The next player's options are 2, either to deliver the 2 tobacco goods or the 1 coffee. They select the 2 tobacco goods and will gain 2 victory points. So the next player can only sell the 2 coffee goods and gain 2 victory points as well. We have completed a round, but the process will not end until all players have delivered as much as they can. It's the captain's turn again, and it seems that they cannot deliver more goods. However, the player has an active wharf. The wharf acts as an imaginary ship that can load any number of goods of one type. Of course, you can use this ship for only one delivery. So the captain will deliver the 4 indigo goods and will gain 4 victory points. The next player is out. The next player must deliver the 1 coffee good and gain 1 victory point. And now the phase has ended. When the captain phase ends, all players can keep only 1 barrel of the remaining goods. Not 1 of each kind, only 1 barrel. So all these goods will be discarded. If you have a small warehouse like the captain does here, you can keep all barrels of 1 type of goods. And with a large warehouse, you can keep all barrels of 2 type of goods. If you have both warehouses, you can keep all barrels of 3 types of goods. Finally, if you have an active harbor, you gain +1 victory point for each delivery. So if I had the harbor and I was the captain, I would gain +2 victory points for the first delivery and +1 victory point for each one of my other deliveries in the phase. As the very last step of the phase, players empty all fully loaded ships. All other ships partially loaded remain as they are. Finally, the prospector role offers no action but just a privilege for the player who takes it, and this is simply taking 1 doubloon from the bank. The game's end is triggered in 3 different ways. The first one is during the builder's phase, if a player fills their last building slots in their personal board. The second one is at the end of the mayor's phase, if there are not enough colonist tokens to replenish the colonist ship as required. The last one is during the captain's phase, if the supply of victory points depletes. Until the end of the game, players will still score victory points which will be kept on paper. When the game's end is triggered, players continue until the round is over. That is, until all players have selected a role and have executed the corresponding phase. During the game, players keep their victory point tiles hidden from other players. In scoring, players reveal their hidden victory point tiles and write them on paper. Next, players gain the victory points depicted in the top right corner of all their constructed buildings, regardless if they are occupied or not. This player gains 22 victory points. Finally, players gain victory points from the scoring abilities of their large buildings, but only if they are occupied. With a guild hall, the player gains 2 victory points for each large production building, the player has 2, and 1 victory point for each small production building. Again, it doesn't matter if the building is occupied or not, so the player gains another 6 points for this large building. From the resident's large building, the player will gain victory points depending on the number of occupied island spaces. With 11 occupied spaces, the player will earn another 6 victory points. The fortress grants the player 1 victory point for every 3 colonists on their board, even the ones that are in San Juan. That player has 18 colonists and would gain 6 points. With the customs house, players gain 1 victory point for every 4 victory points gained during the game. With 33 victory points, that player would gain an additional 8 victory points if they had this building. Finally, with the City Hall, the player gains 1 victory point for each violet building, occupied or not. So the player would score another 6 points if they had this building. After tallying up the scores, the player with the most points wins the game. If there is a tie, then the tied players add up their remaining goods and remaining doubloons, and the player with the highest total wins. If the tie still exists, all tied players share their victory. And that were the rules of the Great Puerto Rico. If you like our videos and want to see more, please subscribe to our channel, and until next time, have fun and play more board games.